Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Center for Spiritual Living Victoria. And if this is your first time visiting us today, my name is Carrie Hunter, and I'm the spiritual director of the Center for Spiritual Living Victoria, which is located on Cook Street, actually in the Cook Street Village Activity Center. If you'd like to visit us there in person, we'd be really happy to greet you in person and to have you stay afterward and enjoy some refreshments with us and to get to know you. Anyway, welcome today, and welcome to those of you who are still at home, social isolating to some degree because of the pandemic. My topic today is the path to an inspired life. Now, when I do my talks, typically I'll be reading a book or a few books that will inspire me along the way. And then I sit down and type out a talk. And and when I sit down to type it out, it typically doesn't really resemble much of what I've been reading about all week. And then after I've written it, when I actually deliver it, it seems to change again. So we'll see what this is going to unfold today. But what it did for me when I was thinking about it just before I signed on today is an old friend of mine, somebody that I haven't seen for, oh gosh, I probably haven't seen him for about 20 years, um, was instrumental in a lot of things in my life. He used to serve on the board of directors of a huge international festival that I did. And he lived in Calgary. He was a businessman, very successful businessman. And I can remember sometimes popping into his office if I was in Calgary, and there would be no receptionist. I'm not sure if she was always out to lunch or just he didn't have one. I never did ask. But I would just go into his office, which was very spacious, and it had all kinds of original art from some of the great masters on the walls. And Neil typically would be lying on a sofa, staring at the ceiling, gaining inspiration, he said. Or alternatively, he'd be sitting in the lotus position meditating. He wasn't your typical businessman at the time. And now we're talking about, oh gosh, 35 years ago, I guess, when I first met him. So he was always a bit of an enigma and always very entertaining, very spiritual man. And I was always into spiritual studies. I mean, ever since I can remember. But I had not yet discovered science of mind, which, of course, is the philosophy that I'm now with, the teaching that I'm now with. And Neil was really responsible for my discovering it because he called me one day and said, you know, there's a conference going on up at the Banff Springs Hotel, and I think that you would really enjoy it a lot. So uh, he said, you know, why don't you just go and register for it, go and check in. And that seemed like a good idea. So I went up and I signed up. It was a Friday night, Saturday, and Sunday. And I didn't really know what to expect. But when I stuck my head in the door, I thought, oh my goodness, this looks like a typical church. And so I sat right at the back of the room by the door so I could make a quick escape if I needed to. Anyway, it turned out that there was no need for a quick escape. It was absolutely spellbinding. And I had a wonderful weekend, and that led me to what was called the Center for Positive Living at the time in Calgary. And I used to stop there sometimes on my way to the airport if I was going out of town, or else on my way back to Banff from a trip somewhere. Um, but I was always really grateful to Neil for that. And one day he called me and he said, you know what? I'm going to shut down my office, and I'm giving up my business life. I'm leaving my family. And he said, I'm going to sell off all my art. I'm leaving them with everything. And he said, I know there's a painting in my office that you've always really loved. And he said, if you'd like to have it, you know, I would like you to have it. So anyway, I went in and I do have this wonderful painting, which I was able to buy from him for a pittance of what it was actually worth. And Neil subsequently got rid of everything. And I moved to Vancouver, but still continued with my job in Banff. And Neil arrived on my doorstep one day with one of his daughters who was about to go to university in Victoria. And he asked if they could spend the night at my place, and I said, well, of course you can. And he basically had given away all his money, had given away everything. And he said he was about to embark for the States, where he was going to become a cowboy poet. And I thought, well, that's an unusual midlife crisis, but you know, Neil, if you're inspired, and he said he was inspired, he said this was just calling him very, very deeply. And he said that the one thing that was missing was a rice cooker. If he had a rice cooker, then he could survive as he was traveling. So I gave him a rice cooker. I never used it anyway. Anyway, fast forward a year later, I opened up my mailbox, and in it was a book of poetry that Neil had published. And inside the book was a check for $1,000 US. And he said, what goes around comes around. You gave me a rice cooker, and I have become a very successful cowboy poet. And that was just Neil. He could not avoid success in his life. And I realized as I was thinking about that today, it's because he was always well along the path to an inspired life. He did what called to him, even though some people thought it was a little bit crazy at times. He listened to that inner calling, and he went forward with it. And I admire that so much about him. You know, he traveled, and he went to poetry readings, and he read his poetry everywhere, and he sold his books of poetry, and he's in a wonderful, wonderful relationship, loving relationship with a wonderful woman now. And I don't hear from him very often, but when I do, it's usually when a new book of poetry arrives in the mail, and it's always something special. But just before Neil closed everything down, he sent me a poem one day. And that poem came to my mind as I was thinking about my talk this week. And it was still forests, deep waters, help me to stop and see that while I'm sometimes pursuing my bliss, it is always pursuing me. I love that. While I sometimes pursue my bliss, it is always pursuing me. Neil understood that. He understood that when he followed his passion, that he was in a state of bliss, and that it was always there, just searching for him to find it. And when he let go of his ego self, he found it and went forward, divinely guided along the way. And as I was thinking about that and smiling to myself, all of a sudden, you know, I remembered what I read last week from the mystic Patanjali, and I've pulled it out again to read today because it really is relevant still. Well, it's always relevant. When you're inspired by some great purpose, some extraordinary project, all your thoughts break their bonds, and your mind transcends limitations. Your consciousness expands in every direction, and you find yourself in a great, new, wonderful world. Dormant forces, faculties, and talents become alive, and you discover yourself to be a greater person by far than you ever dreamed yourself to be. You know, it is such an important thing. And just in simple English, you know, when we get into our inspiration, when we follow what it is that inspires us, we forget about limitations. We stop thinking about, well, I can't do it because, and then coming up with a whole list of reasons why, perhaps reasons that other people have given to us along the way, or things that we've created for ourselves out of the stories that we've told ourselves. We brush away those limitations when we really get into our inspired selves, and our minds expand, and we are flooded with ideas and with inner guidance. Now, the thing is, we need to be able to stay in that place and not let our ego minds interfere and say, well, you know, maybe this is a little bit crazy. Maybe this is a little bit risky. You know, I'm not really sure if I should be doing that. The thing is that suddenly we're in the company of giant geniuses. You know, Edison, I remember, well, I don't remember because I wasn't there when Edison was doing his experiments, but he wrote that that inspiration is 1% and perspiration is 99%. And I was thinking about that again today, and I thought, don't like that at all. I much prefer that 99% is inspiration and 1% is perspiration. And when we are following divine guidance, when we're following that calling, even though it may have seemed risky, we're in that place where it isn't so difficult. Those ideas keep flowing, and we do things that we perhaps thought we would never do. I'm sure that Neil never, ever in his younger years thought that he might one day go to the U.S. and become a cowboy poet. But all of a sudden, he had that calling to be there, and he had those beautiful thoughts that were always going through his mind. He was quite an extraordinary person. So what I think we need to do is to, reverse what Edison said, to be 99% in our inspiration and to sweep aside all of the reasons why we can't do something and instead be in that field of infinite possibility. Norman Vincent Peale, I think it was, who wrote, "I can do anything through God that strengtheneth me." So knowing that we have this power and this presence within us, remembering the truth of who we are, that we are spirit having a human experience, remembering it, but not just remembering it, believing it, owning it. It makes everything possible. Wayne Dyer said, when we're inspired by a great purpose, everything just works. And, we have to get our ego minds out of the way. We have to follow that inspiration and move into spirit. And Wayne Dyer called spirit or said that the word for inspiration rather was in spirit. He said if you put that together, in spirit, it's the same thing as being inspired, because we are in the presence of spirit and we are following whatever the message is that spirit is giving us. And it can seem like a risky path to follow. But the thing is that there's no risk when we're following our bliss. Now, by following our bliss, it doesn't mean just, sitting on the beach and drinking a milkshake or something like that. Although that can be a blissful thing on a hot afternoon. I don't mean to demean that in any way. But it's that higher calling, it's that purpose. It's what is it right now that's calling to me? And it doesn't matter that it never called to me when I was a child or when I was in my 20s or 30s. It's what is it that's calling me right now to do? What is it that is calling you to do right now? Something that perhaps you've set aside or you thought you would never do, or something you'd like to do. You've recently thought about it, but you kind of thought it was impossible. The thing is, do you have the faith? Do you have the belief in yourself? Do you have the belief in the spirit that is within to inspire you along the way, to give you inner guidance about exactly what it is that you need to do each step of the way? I don't think I realized the importance of the subject of this talk today until I started thinking about it on Friday of this week, really thinking about it and starting to write about it. And I found myself really choking up and I found myself in tears at one point, because I had to ask myself, when was it that I stopped fully believing in myself? Did I stop believing fully in myself? Or when was it that I started to think that things were difficult or had to be difficult? Things couldn't be easy anymore. And, I looked back on, I've had a number of careers in my life. And I applied for my first job, which was, well, actually, in a way, I guess I didn't. When I was in high school, my English teacher asked me if I would like to write a weekly column for the Calgary Herald newspaper, and it would be about school life and teenagers and so on. And I said, yes, I would. And I actually got paid $25 a week, I think, for it. No, $15 a week it was for writing it. And subsequently, I became a feature writer for the Calgary Herald, and I loved that job. It was just absolutely wonderful. And then that led to a job as a writer producer in television, and that led into a job as a newspaper editor and a correspondent for CBC radio and television, and on it went until there are other things in between, but until I was asked to found an international television festival in the town of Banff. And with every job I had, except the first one, I said, well, what is that? And with the last job in particular, the person who hired me, who was the president of the Banff School of Fine Arts at the time, said, well, we don't know, but it can be anything you want it to be. And I said no at first, but he kept at me. And then finally, when he said it could be anything I wanted it to be, the juices started to flow and the ideas started to come. And all of a sudden, there was that inner calling to do that. And I said yes. And I didn't have very much time. I had 9 months to organize the first one, which for an international event is not a whole lot of time. And I didn't have any staff right up until the last minute. The last 2 weeks, I guess, I had a bunch of volunteers. But the thing is, I just, again, followed whatever it was uh, that that was pulling me. It was like a magnet pulling me toward things. And within a few weeks, I was in Berlin at an international festival, and I befriended journalists there because, of course, I came from a journalism background. And I saw all of the work that went into doing a big festival. So I had in my mind what it would look like. And shortening the story a lot, um, the first festival ended up looking very professional. I went to the CBC and asked for help in Calgary, and they came up and wired the theater at the Banff School of Fine Arts, and there were television monitors everywhere, and with things in French and English, and we had French English translation for workshops and seminars, and it was extraordinary because I didn't have to work very hard. At least, I mean, I shouldn't say I was working a lot, but I was never fatigued. I was always excited, and it always felt good. And when the international media came to attend and report on it, it was a very, very exciting time for me. And I had met some of these along the way. And I won't get into all of that right now, but let me tell you what the downside was. I had a very small board of directors. There were 5 people on it. And the chair of the board was a filmmaker from Alberta, and there were 4 other men on the board. And at the end, when I was hired, I was told I didn't have to raise any money. It was mine to just do the job, get the festival up and running, get it happening. And I thought, well, that's good because I really didn't like the idea of going around asking people for money. So when the festival was over and the dust settled on it, the board had not raised $1, and we had a deficit of $250,000. And I was in total shock. But people who attended the festival from other countries, particularly from Europe, said this is a really important festival. You have to keep this going. And that was going through my mind as the board was sitting there in paralysis. And 4 of the men kind of disappeared, but the president of the Banff School of Fine Arts, who was on the board, said, Carrie, you seem to want to carry this on. If you do, I will pay your salary for the next year if you can raise the money to cover the deficit and raise enough money to do the next festival. And I said, fine. I mean, I didn't know anything about it. I really, truly didn't. And I was so naive. And so forgive me for really going into a very personal story here. But I need to talk about how inspiration worked for me during those years, and that I lost it at some point, and that I'm still working to find it again. And I'm hoping that through telling this story that it can be helpful to everyone. When with having to raise a lot of money all of a sudden, when I had never done anything like that before, I was in my early 30s and I was totally naive. You'll see how naive I was in a minute. And so I was sitting alone in my office, which was in the basement of the theater building at the Banff School of Fine Arts. And I thought, well, got to find $250,000 in a hurry. Got to find it somewhere. And I thought, well, I don't know him, but I'm going to call the provincial treasurer and ask for a meeting and ask if the Alberta Treasury will loan the festival the money to cover the debt. And then I will promise to raise enough money to cover that debt. I mean, it never for a moment dawned on me that that was not possible. It never for a moment dawned on me that you don't go to the provincial treasurer and ask for a loan. And it didn't happen overnight. It took me about 6 months of paperwork, but in fact, the provincial treasurer did loan the festival $250,000. It was deposited in the Bank of Montreal in Banff. And then I had to go and find the money to cover the loan. And so, again, being completely naive, I phoned the office of the Premier of Alberta, who was Peter Lougheed at the time, an amazing guy. And I asked for a meeting. And he said that they were having a kind of conference of his party, not his party, but of his ministers and his colleagues in the party in Edmonton on the weekend, and would I like to fly up and perhaps we could have a quick lunch and talk. He didn't ask me what it was about. And I said, sure. So up I went, and we sat and talked, and I said to him, I have to find, at least another $250,000 to cover that deficit. So I need a grant. And he said, well, I can see that this festival is going to be really important to Alberta because we want an Indigenous film industry here. So he said, I want you to go and see the Minister of Economic Development, the Minister of Culture, and the Minister of Tourism. And I want you to tell them, when you phone for an appointment, I want you to tell them that I sent you. And so I thanked him. Anyway, went and had the meetings. The Minister for Economic Development, when I went in to see him, he said, okay, you've got 15 minutes, talk fast. And so I told him the story, told him about our deficit. I said, I need $300,000 right now, and I need that $300,000 annually from your department so that we can get this festival on solid ground. And after 15 minutes, he said, I will get back to you in a couple of days. And he called me and he said, I'm not giving you $300,000 a year. I will start with $200,000 a year. So you're going to have to raise the rest elsewhere. So I said, thank you. And then I went to the federal government, to something called Telefilm Canada, and was able to get them to commit to $185,000 a year. And after that, went to the Lottery Foundation in Alberta and got some grant money from them. And I was in the kitchen of a friend at Christmas time that year, excuse me, and the chairman of Nabisco happened to be there. And I had met him, I knew him. And he said, I need to talk to you for a minute, come over here in the corner. So I went over, and he reached in his pocket and he pulled out this rumpled piece of paper, not very big, and he handed it to me, and I looked at it, and it was a check for $100,000 for the festival. Well, I nearly fainted. I mean, this rumpled up check for $100,000 out of his jacket pocket. The money poured in. And after that, each year I was on a fundraising trip all over Canada and the US and parts of Europe, raising money to sponsor various things at the festival. But it never once occurred to me that it wasn't possible. And when I was first going to the provincial treasurer, and it was taking 6 months, the president of our board, or the chair of the board that basically had sort of vanished, called me almost every day around 4 o'clock in my office. And I would say, well, I've done this piece of paper and I've done this one and I've sent this one in and now they want this. And he would say, oh, you're pipe dreaming, Carrie. It's never going to happen. You're just a dreamer. It'll never happen. And that to me was like waving a red flag at a bull. I never for a moment believed that it was not possible. But all I kept hearing from him was that it was never going to happen. And, the festival was dead in the water. Anyway, I would hang up the phone. I would sit and cry for 15 minutes. Truth be told, I'd cry for 15 minutes. Then I would go from my office into the washroom. I'd wash my face. I'd put my makeup back on. I'd go home. I'd cook dinner for my family and spend the evening with my family, and then back at work the next day. Same story again. But the thing is, I always believed. And I don't know why it never occurred to me that these things might be impossible. If someone said to me now, go to the provincial treasurer and ask for $100,000 for your church, I would say you're out of your mind. What are you talking about? Somewhere along the way, I lost that naivete. But the thing is, for the first several years of the festival, I guess I never did during the festival because things just worked. And during the early years, maybe the first, I guess 3 or 4 years, people who came to the festival from other countries said, "This place is magic. It's absolutely magic." Well, it was. It was spiritual magic, and it had nothing to do with me. Spirit was working through me, was divinely guiding me, and I didn't even know it. I didn't understand that at the time. And when I got into this teaching, all of a sudden I did understand it. I thought, oh, I really had very little to do with it. I was a conduit, and I was given this information, and I followed what it was I was told to do. And everything worked. It worked I could go on for hours about how it worked, and I'm not going to do that. I just wanted to give you a taste of that today because I was in a place of such innocence. And what I've come to realize is that when we're in a place of pure innocence, that's where we're in our God selves. I didn't know it at the time. Um, I had a deep and abiding faith, but I certainly didn't know I was going to become a minister. That wasn't on my agenda at all. I was going along with life as it happened. And I used to say to people, it's interesting, life just comes and taps me on the shoulder, and all of a sudden I have this new wonderful job, and I'm making lots of money, and I'm having a really good time, and it's unfolding perfectly. And I didn't know that it could be that easy. And when I got into this teaching, I realized that's what it's all about. It's not all about having all kinds of money, but what it's all about is about following your inspiration. It's about being on that path of an inspired life so that we are constantly listening to that inner voice, listening to that divine calling, so that we're going forward all the time, absolutely confident that everything is going to be working out just fine. And so what really choked me up this past couple of days was thinking, what happened? What happened to me along the way? When did I stop believing that everything was possible? When did I start thinking that things were too hard? It wasn't when I started my first church. I know that because it opened seamlessly. It was amazing. Before I opened, someone gave me a check for $5,000. It was unsolicited. It was a gift in a card, a greeting card. And the first night that I did services, I did 2 services, there was $10,000 in donations in the basket. $10,000. I mean, we don't get $1,000 in our baskets on a Sunday. And so it was just extraordinary. And I had 3 other ministers who joined me, and we were counting the money together afterward and just kind of in shock, recognizing that a lot of people who came to the service knew that it was a brand new church, knew that it did need some financing to get things going, and they were very, very generous. But I never, ever stopped believing that the money would be available. I didn't have to think about money. And then as time went on with other churches where I served, it wasn't my role to do that. And it wasn't my role to be in administrative capacity. And so I really wondered, through conversations with a friend who is a minister, quite recently, we were just talking about how it's so important when you're a minister to be in a place of grace. To be in a place where you're listening to your divine guidance, where you're listening to your inner voice. Actually, I can say who it is. It's Reverend Jennifer Tennant. And we were talking about the importance of listening to that inner calling, of listening to that divine voice. And I realized that I get so caught up in the business of the church that I miss that divine guidance. I don't hear it. I don't feel it. And for a few years, I think it was maybe 2017, 2018, we had a treasurer who every time we had a board meeting, he would say, well, we've got about 3 months left, and then we're going to have to close. And I thought, that's not in my consciousness. That's not That's not the way that I operate. That's not what I think. It's not what I believe. And, here we are. We're we're still open. Um, but but I realize that when I hear that kind of thing over and over again, when I hear people worried about money, when I hear people wondering, can we stay open? Will we stay open? And right now, I mean, we're fortunate we have a reserve, but there's always concern about losing that. And I realize that there's this consciousness of fear around money has started to permeate my own being in many ways. And that I need to get back into that place of just knowing that it's all okay, that everything is possible, that there's nothing that can get in the way except what I believe, except me. I can get into my own way. And so right here and right now, I declare that this part of my life is over in terms of fussing over things. Instead of worrying about things, instead getting back into that place of inspiration, being in spirit, as Wayne Dyer would say, being in spirit, being inspired, knowing that spirit is fully alive and awake within me and within every one of you, within everyone who ever attends our center, that we all see the bigger picture for our center, that we all see the magnificence that it can be, that it, not that it can be, that it is, and that it will be ever growing in that spiritual magnificence, that we will grow and prosper, and that there's nothing that can stop us except for our own minds. When we start thinking in terms of limitation and lack, then we experience limitation and lack. And I don't want that to be about my life or yours or the life of our center at all. Not now, not ever. And so I realized that we have to get into that place of innocence, that place of believing that everything is possible. That, manna from heaven. It came to me so easily in previous careers. And I made large amounts of money personally during those times. It flowed. It flowed in, it flowed out. It's about being in the divine flow. It's about not being tight-fisted at all. If our fists are like this, then we can't give. We also can't receive. So we have to be open to receiving and open to giving and open to wonderful divine causes in our own community and in the world, as we are committed to do each year as we tithe to causes that really, really need our funding. And we grow from that. And so we mustn't be in a place of worry about it. And we need to be open to all of life's possibilities. I was talking to my elder granddaughter yesterday actually, and she's just graduated from film school, and she's working on a big television series in Toronto, and the days are long. She gets up at 5 a.m. to be on set, and comes home late at night. And she said, I'm feeling kind of tired, but she said it is so worth it. And I could feel in her the innocence that I carried with me at her age, that passion. And I said to her, isn't it wonderful that when you're working with something about which you are passionate, that being tired, feeling exhausted just doesn't really exist. You get a few hours of sleep and you're energized and you're up and doing it again. And she said, yes, thank you for reminding me of that, because that is how it works. It's how it works for me. It's how it works for you. If you let it, if we let it, collectively and independently, nothing can stop divine inspiration except our minds, the blocks that we put in the way. And so we need to clear those blocks out of the way once and for all and claim ourselves to be unstoppable forces for good, to be inspired, not to be worried, to give up perspiration and take on inspiration all the way, and to follow that path from this point forward to live an inspired life, because that's how it will work, and so it is. Thank you so much for being here today. If you like what you've heard, I invite you to make a donation to our center. You can do that by going to our website at www.cslvictoria.org. And there's a donate button there where you can either donate by PayPal or by credit card, or you can send an e-transfer to donate@cslvictoria.org, and that goes directly into our bank account. Thank you so much for what you give. Thank you for all you do. I look forward to seeing you at our center as soon as you can make it there. It would be lovely to welcome you there in person, and just gives me joy in my heart to imagine that. So I'm holding that vision, holding that image, that you will come back to the center if you've been away because of the pandemic, and if you're new, that you'll pop in and have a visit with us as well. And meanwhile, have a wonderful, wonderful week. May your lives be filled with inspiration, and I look forward to chatting with you soon. God bless you all.